This episode and every episode of the Beer Guys Radio Show is brought to you by Ironmonger Brewing. Visit Ironmonger at their tap room in Marietta, Georgia, or online at ironmongerbrewing.com.
Open up a tab, grab a seat, and pour a pint. It's time for the Beer Guys Radio Show.
You want free beer? Go to the brewery.
Dedicated to the art, science, and enjoyment of craft beer.
Yo, what's wrong with the beer we got?
Now, here are your hosts, Tim Dennis and Brian Hewitt.
And welcome to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We're broadcasting from the Beer Guys Radio Studios in Marietta, Georgia. This week we're talking homebrewing. I'm Tim Dennis, and with me as always is my good friend and co-host, Brian Hewitt.
Hey, Tim. Joining us today, we have Jay Brantley and Jon Shari, both highly respected, award-winning homebrewers. Jay and Jon also took the number 1 and number 2 spots, respectively, for Best Homebrewer in our 2018 Best of Georgia Beer Awards. We're going to talk about why you should get into homebrewing and some general tips from the guys, and maybe dive a little bit into the brewing of great IPAs and Stouts. Jay and Jon, guys, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
We got the best of Georgia homebrewing with us this week, Brian, so it's going to be a good time. We're doing a little pre-gaming right now. We're going to dig into their homebrews here in a little bit. They both brought some beers, but we're enjoying one from a good Georgia brew pub right now, Good Word Brewing. They're Fantastic Fruited Sour, Fruited Berliner.
And it's pretty fantastic.
It is fantastic.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorites. Nice fruit note, good, just tart, not too sour, just a nice tartness to it. And this is a good one. And Brian, this was actually on our rounds this weekend. We have this one not from this weekend, but we went over there.
Sure.
Had a little Shelton Fest, mini Shelton Fest over there. They just started getting those, so we got some Cantillon beers, and we ate some mussels and fries and all the good Belgian beer and foods over there.
Oh yeah, that was great. The Rosé de Gambrinus, however you say it, that was kind of a fun surprise. And oh man, there was one with hop terpenes in it from Burial, the tearing of flesh from bone, and it wasn't super dank like I expected. It was actually more fruity, but I got excited by the weirdness of the ingredients, the terpenes being in there. So
you did come up with the idea for a seafood goza. So
I did, yes.
So weirdness is. John, have you ever used seafood in any of your beers?
No.
Any plans to? Maybe a. Well, have you done an oyster stout? That may be as crazy as you can get.
No, I wouldn't be against it, but I like to try and think a little more outside the box on things that haven't been done.
Well, if you need outside of the box,
I got one.
Brian can help you out there. Jay, how about you? Any seafood beers yet?
No. At one point in time, I had oyster stout on my lineup, and then I decided to kick it off. So no, I haven't. Yeah. So it's on the radar, but maybe at some point in time.
That's one Brian and I had talked about brewing before too, and it just never made it with the other stuff we're brewing. But I enjoy a good oyster stout, a little brininess in that.
I do as well, and my understanding is you don't necessarily even have to put the oysters in there. Sometimes the shells themselves is enough to impart the brine or whatever you're looking for in that. So
some brininess and minerality.
Yeah, something random came back to me from the homebrewing days. It just suddenly popped in my head. It's like, oh yeah, you don't need the oysters. Cut down on all them fats and proteins and keep your head retention. So
right. So Brian, what else did you get into this week?
So also did the Sweetwater 22nd anniversary throwdown and drank a number of beers there. Had their guide beer, the new lager with the maps on the cans.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a solid drinking beer. It's cool cans too. I like them. I love maps, and that's the whole design. But as a drinking beer, it's fantastic, crushable, that sort of thing. They also had that Peach, Love, and Happiness Berliner, which was really nice. And I also made a trip down to a New Realm and got to try the latest rendition of Radagast and their Inman Park Pills, which is also a very enjoyable drinking beer with some lemon drop hops in it. So that was tasty.
I've been enjoying all these drinking beers.
Yeah.
I made the rounds to a few places this weekend, and I don't think I can vote too much on beers because I'm still I'm on the tail end of a cold here, and I thought I kicked it, but I do apologize if I sound a little nasally this week. I thought it was going, and it's like, no, you know what? We're about to go on the air. I think we'll stuff you up a little bit there.
It's sick. You're either sick or you've got more gravitas now. I'm not sure which one it is.
We're going to go with the second there.
Okay.
I think so. John, how was your week, man?
It was good.
Anything exciting?
Probably a little more boring.
Okay.
But, I don't drink too often during the week, actually. But I did get out to the Brick Store pub thing with the Cantillon beers, and that's pretty much all I drank there. But I enjoyed them all.
That was an impressive list. We were trying to look to go down to Brick Store for all the Cantillon stuff or up to Goodword. And I hadn't been to Goodword in a while, so that one won out for us there. So, how about you, Jay? Any Cantillon in your week?
No, for me, it was had Monday off, so it was an opportunity to get a batch of brew in. So I had an Irish Red, which hopefully I'm looking to push towards the National Homebrew competition here a little bit later. And I got a yeast starter ready for a Belgian triple that I'll be doing here on Friday.
What makes an Irish Red Irish?
Most of the time it's going to be the yeast. So I use the 1084, the Y Yeast 1084 strain, so it's just an Irish strain of yeast.
Okay.
So you're going to get a particular flavor profile from that. So typically that's why an Irish Red is
the yeast
Irish,
that's used there. It's not just the word Irish on the front end.
I was curious.
You were wondering that?
Dancing a jig or a little whiskey in there? I don't know, whatever.
Both. You do what you want to with it.
Well, Tim, I think it's time for the beers of the week.
Crack open a cold one. It's the Truck and Tap Beer of the Week. Woo-hoo! Craft beer and food trucks in downtown Woodstock. Truckandtap.com.
Well, Brian, as I mentioned, a little pre-game in here with some Goodword Brewing. We also had one from our friends up in Knoxville at Elkmont, Old Gold, one of their lagers there. Nice beer. And we're going to be drinking homebrew. John, you mentioned, I believe we have, is it a chocolate cherry stout?
Yes, barrel-aged in an ASW bourbon whiskey barrel.
Okay. And what is the sour that you brought? Saison base Apricot Sour, is that correct?
Yeah. It's one that I've done over the past few years. Just over and over, just keep using the bugs from that.
Jay, what's in your bag of tricks this week?
I have a little bit of everything, but along the lines of stouts, I have a dry Irish stout. Same thing, Irish strain of yeast. And then I have an Imperial Creme Brulee Java stout. So that's absolutely. So that is a beer, I want to say it was back 2012. It was back when Hop City and Five Seasons were doing that homebrew competition that actually won first place. So I want to say it was 2012, 2011. It's been a long time now. So.
And Hop City and Five Seasons, big homebrew and bottle shop and brew pub, or previous brew pub.
Yeah, formerly brew pub.
Former brew pub, yeah. So good stuff. Well, Brian, what's happening this week in the news?
What's in the news? The beer guys have the scoop.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
Time for headlines.
All right, so since we're talking about homebrewing this week, I thought I'd get us started with an ingredient, a new old ingredient that just became available to homebrewers. One of the oldest Lithuanian farmhouse yeast strains is now available in the U.S., in fact. So Omega Yeast partnered with, and I may mess up her name, Aldona Udrine, the creator of the award-winning Lithuanian farmhouse beer Jovaru, to make this possible. According to the article I read on Craft Brewing Business, the yeast is said to impart citrusy esters and restrained phenols, so like lemon pith, black pepper, and soft mouthfeels. So on the Omega website, you can already find a homebrew recipe for a brew that they did, a Belgian wit, appropriately named Jovaru Wit. So how soon before we see you guys make something Jovaru?
Some Norwegian farmhouse yeast, Lithuanian.
I mean, if I come across it, I'll experiment with it. I've actually been kind of lacking on the sour stuff the past year, but I plan on getting it going again.
Too many stouts to be brewed?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
A lot of barrels to fill.
Brian, did it say there, like, I've heard the Norwegian farmhouse and Lithuanian farmhouse. Did it mention the different characteristics between the two there?
Between the two, not so much, but the interesting thing about this beer is it is I think they call it it's an unboiled beer. So she heats it to a point where it is effectively pasteurized during the mash, but it is never boiled. So it's a completely different kind of animal in terms of beer. And I went down the rabbit hole a little ways on that, but yeah, you don't have to boil a beer to make it, and it's shelf stable. And let's get on to some hot legislation news from the Brewers Association. The Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act has been introduced to Congress, and this bill will make the tax cuts and other provisions from the previous Tax Cut and Jobs Act permanent. So that includes a reduction in the federal excise tax per barrel. It will loosen the rules, or continue to loosen the rules, about transferring beer between breweries and expand the list of traditional ingredients in fermented beverages. There's also some money in there to go to the TTB to improve and accelerate the approval process for new labels, formula applications, and enforcing of violations.
And that was when we had Bart Watson, chief economist there at the Brewers Association. When he was on the show with us, we talked about that tax break in the Modernization Act then, and he mentioned that they were going to go after trying to make that permanent. it's been good for the brewers. They're saving money and they're putting that money back into the breweries to grow there. So it's a positive thing for sure.
I think it's going to happen. With the money in the TTB, there's a lot of incentive to make that a thing.
Make beer great again.
Make beer great again. Yes. Yeah.
Mabba. You're listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We do need to take a break, but we'll be back very soon to talk homebrewing.
Brian and Tim, the Beer Guys. If you're like us, no lunch or dinner is complete without a pint or two of craft beer.
Which is why Truck and Tap in downtown Woodstock, Alpharetta, and Duluth are always on our list. Tim, why do they call it Truck and Tap?
Well, the tap part is easy, Brian. They've got 18 of them.
As for the truck part, that's where it gets interesting. Truck and Tap features your favorite Atlanta area food trucks, so you're getting a different menu every day.
Truck and Tap in downtown Woodstock, Alpharetta, and Duluth.
Truckandtap.com. Let them know that the Beer Guys sent you.
We are Reformation Brewery, celebrating the reformer in you. Locally crafted within the renowned Etowah watershed of Woodstock, Georgia, Reformation creates yeast-forward brews full of aroma and flavor crafted to last. Come see us in beautiful Woodstock, Georgia, for a tour and tasting of unique brews that you can't find anywhere else. Reformation Brewery, set beer free. ReformationBrewery.com.
Follow the Beer Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Now, back to the Beer Guys Radio Show.
Shake it back!
Welcome back to the Beer Guys Radio Show. If you missed an episode, don't worry. All episodes are available as a podcast. Subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and never miss a show. We're talking to Jay Brantley and Jon Shari, homebrewers extraordinaire.
Extraordinary. That sounds impressive.
Yeah, it does. Extraordinary.
Yes, it does. John, we are drinking one of your beers right now. And for those that don't know, your brewery is known as Little Cottage Brewing, correct? Yeah. And we have a beer right now that you call Anthem of Our Own. Can you tell us about this beer?
So I started that probably 3 or 4 years ago, just trying to get into sour beers. Wasn't sure really how to make them. Started off with some bottle dregs mixed with some other stuff that I added, some Brett B and stuff like that. And it just kind of came out good the first time. I just did another test, second batch, came out the same way, and just kind of continued pulling the same dregs out from batch to batch, and it just kind of was its own thing that I had done from those different dregs and stuff. But yeah, it's a Saison base, 4.5% after you add the fruit. So it's refreshing and clean and easy drinking.
Yeah, nice fruitiness to it. Tart, not bracing. It's not going to knock your teeth out with the sourness and that. But the culture, the house culture basically that you have, I think that's pretty interesting for a home brewer. You hear about a lot of breweries that develop those, but if someone wants to do that, so you took bottle dregs from, I guess, beers you enjoyed.
Yes.
Cantillon, Dry Fontaine, different ones like that.
Yes.
Dragged them up, built that up, and then the blend just kind of became your own. How do you harvest that when you finish a batch to keep it going from batch to batch?
Basically just take like a wine thief, is what I've done. I'm sure there's other ways to do it, but on the home brewing level, when you're going into a carboy, just use a wine thief. Get a couple samples with the wine thief, fill up a, clean sanitized ball jar, and you can begin to make a starter again with that to build it up to get it ready for the next batch, and then pitch it with some sack yeast, and it just will take off, do its thing, and you just need to know when it's time. And after doing this 2 or 3 times, 2 to 3 months is pretty much the finishing gravity.
And when you do that, you can keep this going pretty much indefinitely if you handle it properly, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You can't really have too much downtime when it comes in between brews, though. You kind of have to keep those bugs eating on something to keep the thing alive. Or can you freeze and hang on to things, or just keep it in the fridge?
I've never froze it. I have refrigerated it, and some people don't recommend that. Some people don't recommend keeping it. Everybody has their own opinion, but basically I've done both. I've kept some at room temp for several months before using it again. Also refrigerated for several months before using it again, and same results each time. So, I mean, it's pretty healthy.
And Jay, you wouldn't have a problem keeping brews going enough to keep a culture moving from one to the other, would you?
My fridge stays stocked with different strains of yeast.
Yeah. So you said that last year, 2018, you brewed 52 batches of beer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I thought we got up to what, about 40 one year, I think, Brian?
I think so, yeah. 30s,
and that was a lot of
40s,
brewing.
yeah.
I mean, to find time, I mean, that's essentially every week. I'm sure maybe you got double batches in occasionally, but having that kind of average, that's a lot of brewing, Jay.
It absolutely is, yes.
Yeah.
And
So
at a certain point, the equipment you have is a limitation, because I know that we at a certain point, like, I was all game to brew another batch. I'm like, we don't have anything to put it
Run
in.
out of space.
We can't do anything right now. It's like, oh, well, I guess we'll have to go drink somebody else's beer while we're waiting for ours to finish. So.
what do you got, like a dozen fermenters and a bunch of kegs and all that?
I have a bunch of kegs, a bunch of fermenters. So the beneficiaries of me actually brewing so often are my friends and neighbors. Right. So when I go through that much beer, I wish I could drink it all myself. I try my best, but I just cannot make it through all that beer. So I have to call on my friends and neighbors, like, hey, I need to empty out a keg. I need you all to come over and drink some beer. And they say, free beer?
Right.
And it's good beer? Yeah, okay. What time should I show up? So,
yeah, that's it. You don't. If you're brewing beer and you're brewing good beer, you're going to have friends that pop in. You're going to make friends and find them out. Keep it going there.
Definitely. You know, I we haven't met before now. How did you get started? How long have you been doing this, and how did you get started into home brewing?
So I've been brewing for probably about 12 years now.
Okay.
And so it started a couple of college buddies of mine. So they started drinking different types of beer like years ago, and we got introduced to Belgians. And the Belgian style of beers, they were just so different from a lot of the other beers that were out there. And we just tried a lot of the different beers. Wow, there's a lot of interesting beers that are out there. So it was like a New Year's Eve party, like we were hanging out, having a good time, drinking beer. And my friend said, hey, we should start brewing beer next year. So I thought it was a great idea. So next year, 2 weeks later, start looking up what goes into brewing a beer online, getting equipment, and kind of started from there. So first year, I think I did maybe 4 or 5 batches. Second year, maybe 7. And then after I went from naturally carbon to artificially carbon, it kind of just took off from there.
Good stuff. Now, John, I'm not sure we've ever asked you, what got you started homebrewing?
Yeah, it actually, let's see. So I've been doing it for about 7 years now. And before that, I hadn't been into craft beer too much, maybe like 2 years or so. Started drinking different things, and I came across a fruited beer that was kind of a one-time only thing, it said on the bottle, and I liked it enough that I knew that if I wanted to drink something like that again, I would have to make it myself. After my wife asked me if I wanted a homebrewing kit for Father's Day, I was finally like, sure, I'll try it out.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Now she regrets it.
Right. She's like, what have I done? What have I done? Now Brian and I got into it, similar reasons, talking about, chasing beers and the limited things. I can tell you specifically the beer that got us brewing was KBS, Founders KBS, because when we started homebrewing, what's it been, 6-7 years ago for us as
Something
well,
like
right?
that, yeah.
The beer was released, once a year, and stores would limit it here in Georgia to 1 bottle. You'd get 1 bottle. And we were such geeks and truck chasers at the time that we'd go to 3, 4, 10, 40 stores to get our 3 or 4 bottles of it.
And stand in line sometimes.
Right. And we kind of looked at each other and said, this is ridiculous. It's like, well, let's learn to make this ourselves. So we started brewing, and we knew at the time our second batch of beer wasn't going to be KBS. But what it takes is about 3 years, and we did a Mexican cake clone.
Yes.
And we won awards for the beer, and we had friends tell us it was as good as or better than Mexican cake. So it took us 3 years, and we were able to brew some of the beers that we'd been chasing.
So, John, I checked out your setup, I think a couple years ago. I was out there, checking some beers out that you just released. How much has that changed in the past couple of years?
Really not much at all as far as the brewing setup. I have added recently a 30-gallon brew kettle, and I plan on upgrading the hot liquor tank and mash tun to 30-gallon also. But,
Jay, homebrew clubs. So this is a big thing. And your club, I actually hadn't heard of your club before we got introduced to you. PC Mashers, is that right?
PC Mashers, that's right, yes.
And how important has your homebrew club been to your development of your brewing?
Well, it's homebrew clubs are phenomenal, and it's a great opportunity to share a wealth of information. And so, say if I'm brewing a particular style of beer, if I do it one time, I get limited feedback. But if you have a brew club and everyone brings in the same style, now instead of like trying a beer once, you actually get a chance to try it 7 or 8 times. And so everyone does it a little bit differently. So the feedback, the information is really important, and it really helps you perfect your craft. And that's why I think homebrew clubs are so important. It's just the dearth of information that you get, the sharing of information. It really helps you perfect your craft when it comes to homebrewing. So PC Master is something we started a year and a half ago. Started out with just a few of us. We've pretty much grown. So if anyone's in the Peachtree Corners, Duluth, Norcross, Alpharetta area, we meet the 3rd Wednesday of every month. We are more than welcome to have anyone come through.
That's awesome. And you know, it's something that we're fortunate in the time we're in, something like homebrewing, between the internet and clubs and all that, you can find any information you need to learn to do anything you want to do there. So it's pretty, and you get to make beer.
I didn't even know you could make your own beer back in the 90s. I would have been totally into it. I had no idea it was even possible without like an industrial thing. Never occurred to me.
Right,
the
like
internet
a
was new.
5-gallon batch or something, not possible.
Like, no way. Not even possible.
It had to be Miller or Coors or one of those.
Exactly. That's what I would have thought at the time, yeah.
You're listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We do need to take a break, but we'll be back soon to talk more with John and Jay about homebrewing.
Craft beer forged with a reverence for tradition and new styles that start a revolution. Ironmonger Brewing. The brewers at Ironmonger Brewing pride themselves at being masters of barrel-aged, hoppy, and sour beers. They invite you to their tap room in Marietta, Georgia to taste and see. Also visit their barrel room for an intimate drinking experience with great live entertainment. Keep up to date on all things Ironmonger by liking them on Facebook. Ironmonger Brewing, establishing a new standard in craft beer.
Brian and Tim, the Beer Guys. If you're like us, no lunch or dinner is complete without a pint or two of craft beer.
Which is why Truck and Tap in downtown Woodstock, Alpharetta, and Duluth are always on our list. Tim, why do they call it Truck and Tap?
Well, the tap part is easy, Brian. They've got 18 of them.
As for the truck part, that's where it gets interesting. Truck and Tap features your favorite Atlanta area food trucks, so you're getting a different menu every day.
Truck and Tap in downtown Woodstock, Alpharetta, and Duluth.
Truckandtap.com. Let them know that the Beer Guys sent you.
Follow the Beer Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Cannonball coming.
Now, back to the Beer Guys Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Beer Guys Radio Show. I want to give a quick shout out to one of our great radio affiliates, KFLS 1450 AM in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Catch Beer Guys Radio on KFLS every Saturday at 7 p.m. Pacific and Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific. And now back to our homebrew conversation with Jay Brantley and Jon Shari.
Jay, we just got into one of your brews here. This is a stout, that creme brulee stout.
Yep, Imperial Creme Brulee Java Stout.
And I hear there's an interesting story behind this. So can you tell us the story and a little bit about the beer?
Yeah, so there was so several years ago for my job, I'd traveled pretty extensively. So I was probably out of town about 120 days out of the year. Went to a bunch of different parts of the country, so I got a chance to try a bunch of different beers. And one of the best things about being a homebrewer is when I went to a different state and tried a beer that it didn't sell locally, I could actually come back and brew it myself. So I wouldn't necessarily get it right the first or the second time, but I could pretty much just look at the menu, see what the description of it was. I tried 2 or 3 different things, and you know what, like being a homebrewer, regardless whether it's distributed locally or not, I could come home and I could brew it myself. So with this beer, I happened to be in Detroit, and there was a Cunin brewery, and they had an Imperial Creme Brulee Java Stout on tap. And I thought I'd give it a try. I'd never heard of it before, and it was one of the best beers that I've ever had in my life. It was absolutely phenomenal. I'd never tasted that much beer, that much flavor in a beer before. So again, I looked at the menu, and I decided I was going to come home and try to brew it, and it took me about 2 or 3 different iterations to actually get it dialed in. And after that, I mean, it was dag near spot on to the same beer that they had. And the great thing was, being a home brewer, I actually got a chance to brew it at home, and I could have it on tap whenever I wanted. So no waiting in line or anything like that, or no traveling up to Dearborn to get a growler to bring back. I mean, I could absolutely brew it for myself. So that's absolutely one of the best things about being a home brewer.
Sure enough, absolutely.
So when you nail a beer like this, how often do you brew it again, or is it kind of like I've conquered this beer? Do you just move on to the next thing, or do you come back and rebrew this?
That's a great question, and so it varies from style of beer. So with something like this, it has a lot of flavor. It's very rich. It's like a dessert beer. So with these, you're not really going to drink a lot of it. So that kind of tends to sit around in the keg for a little bit longer than some of the beers that are more quaffable. So this doesn't move as fast. I don't necessarily brew it as often as I brew some of the other beers.
And it's one that if it does set in the keg for a little while, it's probably going to be just as good or better. It's not going to fade too fast.
Absolutely. This one is aged for at least, I think this one has aged for almost a year and a half, almost 2 years. And again, the flavor profile is very similar to what it was when I first brewed it.
Yeah, because those flavors will fade over time, but you're in a good spot there with that one because that's really nice.
So, John, you're known for brewing a good number of well-received stouts, homebrew stouts. What is something that homebrewers can do, you think, that can get their stout homebrew game up to another level?
I'd say, first of all, have something in mind. What are you trying to go for? What other breweries that are doing stouts that you like? What does that taste like? What are you looking for? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Know the taste, the flavors of different grains. Taste different grains. Try and find those flavors that might have been in that stout that you liked, and do some research on the web to see like percentages and things like that on the different grains. There's some grains you don't want to go over certain percentages. It can become astringent or anything like that with dark grains. Also, you don't want it too sweet, so finding that balance between flavors and depth of flavor is important.
There's quite a list of things that you can do to really dial it in. What do you think about brew times? Do you go in for the longer brew times when it comes to stouts?
Brew or boil, Brian?
Boil. Excuse me.
I figured you were shooting for boil times.
Boil.
Yeah.
You don't have to. There's different reasons why someone would want to boil longer, but on a homebrew scale, it's a lot harder to do because most people don't have a huge boil kettle and can't do multiple hours of boiling. Otherwise, you'll have nothing in the end.
That's true.
Yeah, start with 7 gallons, finish with a 1 gallon batch there.
But it'll be the best
that's
1
a
gallon.
fine 1 gallon, yeah.
But you can still make a great stout with 60, 90-minute boil.
Now, I got to say, I did think you probably had longer boils with the body and richness in some of your stouts that I've tried. Just the mouthfeel in the body. I was like, he's doing some 4+ hours here on that. So
yeah, the longest I've done so far has been, I would take my 15-gallon kettle when I had that, along with my very first 7-gallon boil kettle. And I would pull enough off the mash tun to pretty much fill both of those. I'd start by simmering, and then by the time it dropped down, after a few hours, I would combine it, top off the 15-gallon boil kettle, and continue to simmer. And then in the end, I'd end up with only 6 gallons.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That is intriguing because effectively, you've got wort in there or malt in there that is boiled at different times. So you've got potentially layers of complexity there. Younger malt mixed in with, older malt, like longer boil times. Like it's a mixed thing. Does that make sense? It's like a gradient of boil time.
I do.
That's what I'm going for. It does make
sense. Absolutely.
And of course, it's going to be totally different on a commercial brewery scale. Most of the time, they're not going to want to pull in second runnings, but that's what I was doing to achieve that volume. Didn't have to, but I wasn't sure how that would also affect, starting gravity and all that.
A recipe like that, how repeatable was that for you, John? Was that something that was like a one, or did you have a process to where you're like, okay, I can do this, I can repeat this?
Yeah, so the first time I did it, there's only so much, when you're hitting high gravity like that, there's only so much attenuation that's going to happen. But repeating it again, I did do it again. I got the same results, and other people got to try it and, confirm that it was the same. But Just taking notes initially, what I did, and repeating with those notes the second time made it pretty simple.
Okay. One more question for you on the stouts, John. Talking about the grain selection and mashing and that. You talked about the specialty, the darker grains that, some people develop in their stout recipe. They may hear that this grain gives this flavor and they want that flavor, but they overshoot it and end up kind of destroying what they're going for. But I've also heard some people say that they kind of stagger the way they mash these specialty grains, that they're not in there for the full mash. Do you do anything special with your mash and the addition of specialty grains to get the results you want?
No, I'm mashing all at once. I have tried adding something a commercial brewer told me years ago that I tried, but I didn't find that the results were really that much different. To do it again was to hold off some of those dark grains because you don't want the percentage too much, or you don't want the astringency from something like, say, Black Patent or whatever, which I don't use, but just as an example, add that last in the mash and you'll get the color without that astringent flavor. But I did not find that to be
no
true for me.
There. Okay.
Not saying it's not true. I'm just saying for me, like, I just did not see the difference.
Yeah, because it's not really necessary to mash those dark grains out, because you're not looking for conversion on the sugars and that. You're just getting color and the flavor from the grain on that.
Right.
Yeah. So, Jay, how about you, man? Any pro homebrewer stout tips there?
I think John covered a lot of it, and I mean the biggest thing outside of cleanliness, yeast health, pitch rate, and fermentation temperatures, that really pretty much covers it. And so with the stouts, that's always a common question. Do you mash everything together, or do you save some of your more roasted grains until later? Which again, there's no conversion there. And typically, just like you, John, I throw everything in there. So there have been some times where I've been DWB, drinking while brewing, and I've forgotten something.
We've been there. We've been there. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, so you do have the opportunity to backfill if you need. Yeah. So I have done that a couple of times. But typically, everything goes in there at once. But yes, sure, if there is a time where you forget something, you can add it after the fact.
Good stuff, guys. Appreciate it. You're listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We do need to take another break, but we're going to be back soon to wrap up our conversation on homebrewing with John and Jay.
We are Reformation Brewery, celebrating the reformer in you. Locally crafted within the renowned Etowah watershed of Woodstock, Georgia, Reformation creates yeast-forward brews full of aroma and flavor crafted to last. Come see us in beautiful Woodstock, Georgia, for a tour and tasting of unique brews that you can't find anywhere else. Reformation Brewery. Set beer free. ReformationBrewery.com.
Craft beer forged with a reverence for tradition and new styles that start a revolution. Ironmonger Brewing. The brewers at Ironmonger Brewing pride themselves at being masters of barrel-aged, hoppy, and sour beers. They invite you to their tap room in Marietta, Georgia to taste and see. Also visit their barrel room for an intimate drinking experience with great live entertainment. Keep up to date on all things Ironmonger by liking them on Facebook. Ironmonger Brewing, establishing a new standard in craft beer.
Follow the Beer Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
To be the man, you gotta beat the man. Woo!
Now, back to the Beer Guys Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Beer Guys Radio Show. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/beerguys. Patrons can get some cool perks like Beer Guys swag and commercial-free episodes. And now back to our homebrew talk with Jay Brantley and Jon Shari.
Jay, we are currently sipping your English IPA. And as opposed to an American IPA, which you also have one of those here with you tonight as well, you brought quite a stock of beers with you. One of everything, right?
I try to bring as much beer as possible, and again, I brew
Be prepared,
a lot.
Right?
So yes, so anything that anyone can do to help me drink some of my beer, please let me know.
We're there for you, Jay.
Yes, we are.
So for those that may not be aware, what is the main difference in an English and American IPA?
So good question. So big difference between the two. With an English style of IPA, it's going to be a little bit more, you're going to get a little bit more malt flavor, and the hops are going to be a little bit more subdued. So with your American IPAs, the malt profile is going to be a lot cleaner, and your hop profile is going to come through a lot more. So English IPAs, again, like biggest takeaway between the two, English IPAs, a little bit more malt balance. The hop profile is not necessarily going to be pronounced. The yeast you're going to use is going to get a little bit more fruitiness, whereas American IPA is going to be a lot cleaner on the malt balance. The yeast profile is going to be very clean, and you're just going to get a lot more hop flavor.
Yeah, that's when the English started saying this is a bitter beer. Americans are like, no, it's
you haven't seen anything yet.
Yes. Hold my beer.
Yeah, hold my beer.
You got this.
Got the 1,000 IBU beer out there. You know, that was all the rage for a while. But now we're on to
we've
hazy
moved. We've
beers.
moved on.
Yeah,
we've moved on. It's all about the haze and the hop flavor.
The tropical,
the bitterness
the juice.
isn't as so much. The juicy,
juicies
and hazies. When you approach brewing these beers, do you approach an English different than you do an American IPA?
Yes, and for an English style, it's more a balance. Whereas from an American IPA standpoint, it could be more about extremes. And that's the biggest difference between the two. So English style, typically the objective is to go for a perfect nuanced blend between the malt profile, the yeast profile, and the hop profile. You're really looking for a little bit of each of those elements each of those things from the three elements. Whereas with an American IPA, your yeast is going to be very neutral, so you're not going to necessarily get a lot of flavor from the yeast. Your grain bill is going to be very neutral, so again, not necessarily a lot of flavor from the grain bill. It's primarily the focus is on the hops.
Make way for the hops
absolutely.
coming through.
Yeah.
Now, John, I know we've enjoyed a lot of your sours and stouts. Do you do IPAs? Do you brew many IPAs?
I don't do many.
Okay.
I recently did, last Monday I brewed an IPA at Cherry Street for the festival coming up, the Juice Strikes Back. So I have
a little collaboration there that'll be on tap.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And that's for those that may be in the Atlanta area or even the Southeast. This return or the Juice Strikes Back Festival last year was called Day of the Juice.
Yeah.
Really great beer festival. We will be there. We're going to be talking to a couple of really great breweries. We're going to talk to Barrel Culture and probably Ology out of Tallahassee, Florida. But if you're in the Southeast, this is one that's worth a little weekender trip for. Come up here and enjoy some of these beers. And come hang out and give us some fist bumps.
I was really impressed by the last year's.
Last year's was a great festival.
It was the first year. I didn't know what to make of it. And wow. I mean, that was a good turnout.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, I imagine probably most of the people listening to this show are going to be going for those American IPAs or the Northeast style IPAs. So if you're going for that where you really want to accentuate those hops, what are your tips for someone homebrewing?
So a lot of late addition hops. And so from a grain bill standpoint, you're really going to go with American two-row, maybe like a Great Western or a Raw or something like that. So you want to leave your grain bill as clean as possible. From a hop standpoint, you're going to go with an American ale, like a Chico strain, something very clean. So it really allows the opportunity for those hops to really just kind of pop. So maybe typically if you're doing a 5-gallon batch from a homebrewer, that's typically what I know, a 5-gallon
pretty
batch.
Pretty average, right.
So, I mean, maybe you'll do an ounce at 60 minutes, and then you're really not doing anything until maybe like 5 minutes left in the boil. From American IPA standpoint, you really want to just let those hops pop. So it's really going to be a lot of additions of late addition hops at the end of the boil.
And how many hops should you use? I'm thinking in a 5-gallon batch, no more than 2 or 3 pounds, right?
You know, that, and that's a great question. Because
does that include dry hopping?
Yes, I know. Yeah. And the New England IPAs, the style profile has really changed, and not just for IPAs, but pale ales as well. Now, pale ales, you're dry hopping, you're doing a lot of late addition hops. I mean, IPAs, you're doing a lot of late addition hops. So it really the pale ales and IPAs with these New England IPAs, that style is really kind of blended together, and it's hard to differentiate between the two sometimes.
Sure.
So
there's a lot of blurred lines
Absolutely.
there. Very much. So, John, what's your tip for brewing IPAs? Is it throw some bugs in there and funk it up? Is that your IPA brewing tip?
That's the only way to do it.
That's the way, yeah. Absolutely.
No, like he said, a lot of late addition hops on the New England style. I actually like that style just because years ago I got burnt out on the West Coast style. Everybody was trying to see how many IBUs they could pack in there, and yeah, it got old pretty quick.
That was a fun conversation. I haven't heard the argument over how many IBUs can you actually taste in a while, but that was a big thing. When was it McKellar that did the 1,000 IBU beer?
I think so. I think it was either McKellar. There was a couple that were in the running for that.
But that was the thing. See how bitter you can make this beast.
I think, as I recall, it's only like 100 to maybe 100 tops IBUs, maybe 120 that you can actually perceive, and after a certain point, it doesn't matter. So I think that some of the West Coast styles are starting to come back, so that should be good news for you. Maybe we'll be starting to see some more of those face peelers for you, John.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some that are kind of a cross between the West and East Coast or Northeast Coast. So, I mean, I like that too. You're taking a little bit of that piney sap bitterness and combine it with some of that fruit that you get from the New England style. I really like that a lot.
Brian, have you ventured into these new school West Coast IPAs lately?
Not too much. I'm aware of a general influence of that happening, that there's more of them.
As we're talking about this here, it just made me think, I wonder if the West Coast coming out now are a little more reserved on the bitterness. Like they want that West Coast bite, but they're not chasing 100 IBUs to get there. So perhaps the slingshot out and bounce back of the Northeast IPA is that these West Coast ones are a little more subdued, where you still have that bitterness that a lot of people are mentioning they miss, that they want to bring back.
Yeah, I can see, you go so far into, you start adding lactose to an IPA, you start adding fruit to an IPA. I did have a strawberry lactose IPA recently, and have we gone too far? Perhaps we shall snap back.
Has science gone too far?
Has science gone too far? So what about Brut IPAs? Have you guys had them, and have you tried your hand at making them? I don't think, maybe John hasn't because he's not so much into the IPAs, but perhaps Jay.
I just haven't had the opportunity yet. I just haven't seen it anywhere, honestly, so I haven't had it yet.
Yeah, and it's and just like John, I'm a fan of traditional West Coast IPAs. And as a homebrewer, if there's a new hot trend that's coming out, I definitely want to try to see how it works, see what I like about it. But for me, I keep coming back to the West Coast IPAs. And so I've done Bruts, I've done Ipas, New England style IPAs. But for me, the traditional West Coast IPAs they're just the best IPAs that are out there, for my personal opinion.
That's your opinion, Jay. That's your thought on it. No, it was something. You know what? When we started Beer Guys Radio back in January 2016, and John, we talked to you there way back in 2016. But it was kind of a running joke on the show where I'm like, I don't like IPAs. This was way back before the Northeast craze made it to Georgia. And I don't really know when that style really picked up from outside of the area. But, as the Northeast, I'm definitely more on the Northeast side. I like the tropical, the hazy. I like the mouthfeel of those. But, I can appreciate a West Coast that's well done, but I'm not a bitter fan.
I enjoy a good pine presence in a beer. That is a nice thing. It's some of the combinations early on of kind of a West Coast influence with some East Coast influence is not quite New England because we didn't quite get there initially when we started out. I like those. That's a good combination of flavor. So I think if I were nailing mine down, mine is kind of a hybrid between the coasts. I think that the pillowy ones are nice, but they're not something that I want to drink a lot of.
We're just all over the place here, man. Everybody's.
That's
why they brew so many.
That's
Absolutely.
an IPA for you. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us, guys. If people want to follow along with your homebrew adventures, where should they go?
You can just search for Little Cottage Brewery on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
And for us, check out PCMasters.com. For any and all information that you want. We have our homebrew club meetings the third Wednesday of every month.
Excellent. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of the Beer Guys Radio Show. Coming up next week, we're going to have our friend Bernard McCoy here with us. He's going to talk beer and cheese pairing, Brian. Now, Bernard works at the renowned Brick Store Pub in Decatur, Georgia, and he does host monthly beer and cheese pairings there. So for more craft beer info, please follow us online. We are Beer Guys Radio on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great week, and don't forget to drink local. Cheers.
The Beer Guys Radio Show on the Beer Guys Radio Network. BeerGuysRadio.com.